Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome to my first ever YouTube video. My name's Jay, and I would like to talk to you about Shakespeare. I know. Why are we talking about a 400-year dead poet? Especially one that so many of us hated discussing in the classroom? Well, precisely because so many of us hated him in the classroom, and yet so many teachers insist on bothering us with the man to this day. Why is that? Well, in this video, and in the next few that I've got planned, I'd like to try and find an answer to that question. I'll be taking a look at one of Shakespeare's most famous plays, Romeo and Juliet, and some of the key scenes in it, and break it down in a way that'll hopefully make sense. By the end of the series, I'm hoping Shakespeare will be more than just the guy who ruined your English class. And I thought, what better place to start with than with Romeo and Juliet? It's the quintessential love story, the play I know most of you will have heard of, by cultural osmosis at least, and the one I know most of you will have to study or are currently studying in school. It has countless adaptations and modernizations and is almost constantly referenced in pop culture. Taylor Swift even has a song called Love Story, which directly mentions Romeo and Juliet. So that's what we'll be doing. In this video, I'm going to take a look at Shakespeare, the Elizabethan Era, the plot of Romeo and Juliet, and the function of its prologue. And then, over the course of the next few videos, I'll deep dive into some of the most important scenes. So let's get started, shall we? So, Shakespeare, probably one of the most influential writers of the English language. If you haven't at least heard of him, I'll have to assume you've spent most of your life living under a rock. In case you have, here's a quick rundown to bring one and all up to speed. Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet, and actor who lived from 1564 to 1616. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, and that's also where he died, at 52 years of age. And we're not exactly sure why, since no contemporary sources explain it, but it may have been of a fever after drinking too much. Just like with his death, not too much is known about his early life. I mean, he probably went to school because his plays show extensive knowledge of the typical curriculum of the time. But back then, it was also common for kids to leave school at the age of 14 or 15. So that would have been around 1578 or 1579. We know that in November of 1582, when he was 18 years old, he married a woman named Anne Hathaway, no relation to the currently living actress, I think, who was the daughter of a well-to-do farmer in the nearby village of Shottery. She was 26 at the time they married and was already pregnant, since her and Shakespeare's first child was born in May of 1583. Feel free to do the math on that one. Then, from 1585 till 1592, very little is known about Shakespeare's life. One has to assume, though, that he did some writing, because by 1592, his plays were being performed in London, successfully enough to draw the attention of fellow playwright Robert Greene, who accused Shakespeare of writing above his wits. This did not stop our boy Shakespeare, though. On the contrary, he just kept on writing, totaling at least 37 plays and 154 sonnets. Anyone else keep thinking of that Hamilton song, "Why do you ride like you're running out of time?" Many of those sonnets were written during outbreaks of the bubonic plague, when theaters in London were shut down. His work made him a huge success in his own time, and his influence continues to this day. After all, here I am making a video about the guy. He has coined countless phrases and shaped storytelling as we know it. For example, before Romeo and Juliet, love wasn't seen as a suitable subject for tragedies. Can you imagine? Also, fun fact, we may not actually know what Shakespeare looked like. That's right, the picture that I showed at the beginning of this section may not be what Shakespeare looked like. If you want to know more on this, there's a video link in the description. But the long and short of it is, there are 3 main portraits of Shakespeare, but they all have issues with them, including the fact that the artists may have never even met Shakespeare. Like I said, for more info, go check out the link to Jay Draper's short on this. She does some excellent work on the history of London that I highly recommend you take a look at. All right, Now that we know about the man himself, let's look at the time period that he lived in. Shakespeare lived most of his life in the Elizabethan era, which was named after Queen Elizabeth I, who reigned from 1558 till 1603. This time period is often referred to as England's Golden Age. Why? Well, because it was marked by stability, peace, and prosperity. Queen Elizabeth's long reign, 45 years compared to the 11 of her two predecessors combined, made for a very stable period. She was known for her diplomatic skills and strong leadership, which kept the nation together and helped minimize internal conflicts. Particularly the intense religious clashes between Catholics and Protestants that were raging under previous monarchs were kept at bay under her. That being said, religion and the church still played a huge role in people's lives. For instance, it was mandatory to attend church every Sunday, or else you'd get fined. I don't know about you, but I'd have racked up quite a lot of debt if that were still the case. It was also mandatory to be married in order to live together, and divorce just wasn't a thing back then. Till death do us part was taken quite literally in Shakespeare's time. One thing that added enormously to England's prosperity at the time were trade and exploration. This period marked the beginning of colonial expansion, which helped establish England as a major power in Europe. The new colonies provided valuable goods and resources for trade. But let's be real here. This expansion also came with a dark side. It involved the exploitation and subjugation of indigenous people and laid the groundwork for some deep-rooted inequality, the effects of which can still be felt to this day. On a lighter note, though, the peaceful stability in this time period allowed literature, art, and the theatre to flourish, giving rise to artists and playwrights such as our very own William Shakespeare. He wasn't by far the only one, but he is one of the most well-remembered, which is why I'm talking about him and not one of the others. One reason why literature and theatre took off so much was that more people were learning how to read. This rise in literacy rates is partly due to the Protestant Reformation that was happening at the time. Protestants believe that you should be able to read the Bible for yourself, hence all those translations from Latin into local languages. But what's the point of having a Bible in your language when you can't read it? So people were being taught how to read, which gave them access to education. And access to education also means more access to literature. And with inventions like the printing press, books became cheaper and easier to get. So as literacy rates started to rise, so did public interest in storytelling and entertainment, making theater a very big part of everyday life. People didn't just want to read stories, they wanted to see them be brought to life on a stage. And where would you go to see a Shakespeare play? That's right, the Globe Theatre. It was built in 1599, then burnt down in 1613 during a performance of Henry VIII, was rebuilt and then demolished in 1644. It was only in the 1990s that it was finally rebuilt near its original site by the south of the Thames and reopened in 1997. As you can see, the Globe was a circular building, designed to give everyone a good view. Rich nobles sat in the covered galleries, while the pit is where the common folk stood, often packed in tight. And they would shout and cheer and even hurl insults at the actors when they didn't like what they saw on stage. I imagine it was kind of like a rock concert, just with way more monologues. By the way, one thing you wouldn't have seen at the Globe? Women performing. Acting was seen as inappropriate for women, so all of Shakespeare's female roles? They were played by young boys. Something else you wouldn't have seen? Evening shows. Since there was no electricity at the time, plays had to be performed in the daylight, so only matinees. And there we have it. That's the broad strokes of the time period that Shakespeare lived in and that shaped the things he wrote about. I could go into more detail, like how there was a strict hierarchical class system that determined not only your social rank, but also your job and your marriage prospects. And while I already touched on how opportunities for women were limited, especially with them not being allowed to perform on stage, that's obviously not the full extent of it. There may have been a queen on the throne, but that doesn't mean women had equal rights and opportunities. feminism was still a long way off. But for now, I'm going to leave it at that. If you want to know more, I've linked some of my resources in the video description. Now, let's finally start talking about one of Shakespeare's most iconic plays, Romeo and Juliet. I'll walk you through the basic plot first, and then we'll talk about the play's structure before diving into an analysis of the prologue. So, what happens in Romeo and Juliet? Well, the short version is Romeo and Juliet fall in love. They get married just 24 hours after meeting, in secret because of their family's ongoing feud. The next day, Romeo kills Juliet's cousin, Tybalt, like you do, and gets banished for it. Meanwhile, Juliet is supposed to marry some other dude named Paris, but can't and won't because she's already married to Romeo. So she and Friar Lawrence, who's the one who married her and Romeo, come up with a plan. She's going to drink a sleeping potion and fake her own death. Again, like you do. Unfortunately, Romeo, who was supposed to get a letter from Friar Lawrence explaining the whole situation to him, also gets told that Juliet is dead. So, like any reasonable dude would, he buys some poison to kill himself. When he returns to Verona, he kills Juliet's other suitor, Paris, and then himself. Moments later, Juliet wakes up and finds Romeo dead. So, of course, she kills herself too. The play ends with the two families finally making peace with each other. Now, you may already know this, and if you do, just bear with me, but Shakespeare's plays almost all follow a 5-act structure, and so does Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare didn't invent this, by the way. It goes back to ancient Roman playwrights like Seneca and was very common in Shakespeare's days. Romeo and Juliet is even used as an example in Gustav Freytag's book Die Technik des Dramas, or Freytag's Technique of the Drama in English, to illustrate what would later become the defining system for dramatic structure, now called Freytag's Pyramid. 5 acts means 5 parts: introduction, rise, climax, return or fall, and catastrophe. Act 1 serves as the introduction, setting up time, place, characters, and conflicts. It usually ends with the inciting incident, or exciting force, as Freytag calls it. This is where the story really gets started. In Romeo and Juliet, it's the Capulet Ball, where our two main characters meet. Act 2 is the rise. This is where tension builds as we move towards the climax. In Romeo and Juliet, the entire second act builds towards their secret wedding. Their love grows, but so does the threat from their family's ongoing feud. The climax, Act 3, can also be called the point of no return. This is where the tragic outcome becomes inevitable, usually through the character's own actions. Romeo kills Tybalt and gets banished for it. That's what sets everything else in motion. Everything that follows is a direct consequence of that. Act 4 is the falling action, though that makes it sound calmer than it usually is, because this is where everything spirals out of control. It's the hero's downfall. Juliet fakes her death to escape a marriage to Paris, but Romeo thinks she's really gone. This sets up the final tragedy. And lastly, Act 5 is the catastrophe, where everything comes to its tragic conclusion. Romeo kills Paris, finds Juliet, supposedly dead in the tomb, and kills himself. Juliet wakes up, sees Romeo dead, and kills herself. The tragedy is complete. This is a pretty crucial part, the main characters dying. It's what makes a play a tragedy. In a comedy, things might go wrong, but they are resolved by the end. In a tragedy, things go fatally wrong, and almost everyone is dead by the end. Alright, now that we know what happens, let's take a look at the prologue and talk about the fact that it gives the entire plot away before the play even begins. Alright, let's first read the prologue, shall we? Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers takes their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage. The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. So, what does this prologue do? Well, I already said that it gives away the entire plot, didn't I? But let's talk about how it does that. First of all, it sets the scene. It states that the play takes place in fair Verona, a city in Italy. It also introduces us to the feud between the two families. That's the ancient grudge that's mentioned. And we now also know that there's going to be a murder, civil blood makes civil hands unclean, and 2 suicides. A pair of star-crossed lovers takes their life. And lastly, it tells us that with the lover's death, the family feud will end. Doth with their death bury their parents' strife. Now, why would Shakespeare do that? Why would he give away the ending within the first 14 lines? Well, there's multiple reasons. Firstly, it creates a sense of dramatic irony. The audience now knows something that the characters don't. This builds tension as well as a sense of foreboding, and it helps with audience engagement. It's sort of like a traffic accident. You want to look away, but you can't. The second reason is, by giving away the ending up front, Shakespeare lets us know that the outcome is as tragic as it is inevitable. Romeo and Juliet are always going to die, no matter what they or any of the other characters do. It's fate. Now, you'd be forgiven for not reading fate into this prologue because it's never actually directly mentioned. However, there is one essential line that gives it away, and that's the part about the star-crossed lovers. Okay, I have to go on a bit of a tangent here because this phrase is a lot more significant than it might at first glance appear. And it has to do with the way that people in Shakespearean times would have viewed the world. Many Elizabethans would have believed in fate, but what on earth has that got to do with stars? Let me explain. Now, stars and celestial bodies have always held a certain significance to people. As far back as in ancient Mesopotamia, around the 3rd millennium before Christ, people have looked up into the night sky and believed that the movement and positioning of stars and planets can influence human affairs. That's the basic concept behind astrology. From Mesopotamia, this idea spread to the ancient Greeks, and from there it entered Islamic culture as part of the Greek tradition. Through Arabic learning, it returned to Europe during the Middle Ages. Now, Shakespeare didn't live in the Middle Ages. That era ended about 100 years or even more before Shakespeare was even born. But just because an era ends doesn't mean that the thoughts and ideas of that time period suddenly become irrelevant. To a Shakespearean audience, the connection between fate and stars would have been very apparent. So for them, the expression, a pair of star-crossed lovers, even though Shakespeare might have invented that specific phrasing, would have made it perfectly clear that fate is against our lovers. Their tragic ending is literally written in the stars. Okay, tangent over, let's get back to the prologue. Because there is one more thing I would like to talk about, and that is the prologue's structure. Now, to some of you, it might already sound significant when I say that it is written in 14 lines. And that is either because you've been watching Doctor Who for a while, or because you've talked about sonnets in school before. Because a sonnet, specifically a Shakespearean sonnet, is a poem that is always written in 14 lines. It also always follows a very strict rhyme scheme, which is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. So let's talk about why it's so important that the prologue is structured like this. Well, Shakespeare is actually quite famous for his sonnets. Remember, I mentioned that he wrote like 154 of them? Yeah, apparently he really loved writing them. And pretty much all of his sonnets deal with love in some way, shape, or form. So, although in this specific sonnet, love isn't mentioned by name, the format makes it clear that we'll be dealing with a love story. And that's what Romeo and Juliet is. It's a love story, albeit a tragic one. The structure also stands in contrast to the content romance versus violence and death. This sets up a key theme of the play. Or more specifically, it sets up that Romeo and Juliet will be full of conflicting themes, such as love versus hate, youth versus age, and fate versus free will, etc. Now, here's something I've always missed until I took a very close look at the prologue for this video. The last line of the sonnet, "What here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend," also underlines the idea of predetermined fate. Again, it doesn't say so directly, which is probably why I have always missed it too, but the line basically means if anything was left unclear by this prologue, the play you're about to watch will make it clear. Now, as I said, this doesn't explicitly mention fate, but it sort of reminds the audience that they already know what's to come. It's basically saying, we've told you what's about to happen, now watch it happen. And one last thing before we're done, the prologue is delivered by a chorus, which is not something that Shakespeare has invented. He has borrowed it from classical Greek drama. Why is that relevant, do you ask? Well, what it does is it adds another layer of formality to the play's introduction. And that, in turn, reinforces the idea that the events of the story are part of a larger, predetermined narrative. So, again, this serves as a way to let the audience know that the outcome is inevitable. Everything that's about to happen was always going to happen like this. All right, I think that is quite enough about the prologue. If you've stuck with me so far, thank you very much for your time and patience. I really appreciate it. Now it's time for one final question before we wrap this video up. And that is, why the hell are we still studying Shakespeare? Well, for one thing, Shakespeare has had a phenomenal influence on the English language. Remember how I said that Shakespeare might have invented the phrase star-crossed lovers? That's right. His usage of the phrase in the prologue of Romeo and Juliet is the first recorded instance of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he really invented it as in first person to ever use it, but it does mean that he at least coined the phrase. And now, the idea of star-crossed lovers is so popular, it's a common trope in fiction. It's also by far not the only phrase he coined. Ever used generous or in a pickle before? Those expressions, especially in their current meaning, were coined by Shakespeare. But apart from that, his plays continue to capture audiences to this day. There's a reason Shakespeare performances are still happening in theaters all over the world, and that's because the themes he explores are kind of universal. Romeo and Juliet, for example, deals with themes of love, family dynamics, impulsivity, societal pressure. We may view things a little differently nowadays, but those are still things we have to deal with in our modern day lives. How many movies tell love stories? How many YA novels have children defying their parents? How many stories are about breaking away from societal norms? Let's face it, you have either seen or read one of these stories before. Shakespeare is just an old-timey example of it all that many of us don't like because we have to study him in school. Well, I hope that I can change that. I hope that in my dissection of the prologue, I have already managed to make things a little more understandable for you. If I have, you might want to stick around, because I do have a few more of these bad boys planned. So, what's next? Well, I'm going to be talking about Romeo and Juliet in quite a bit more detail for a while. I'm going to be looking at some of the most important scenes and analyze them in a similar way than I did with the prologue in this video. The scenes that I'll be looking at are scenes 1 and 5 of Act 1, scene 2 of Act 2, scenes 1 and 5 of Act 3, And then I'll be skipping over Act 4 entirely and take a look at the final scene of the play, Act 5, Scene 3. Now, why am I doing all of this? Okay, I have to be honest, I was one of those students who didn't mind doing Shakespeare in school. Did I love him the way I do now? No, I did not. In fact, I actively avoided him in university. But then I came back to him, mostly because of David Tennant's Hamlet. And being allowed to study Shakespeare on my own terms made me realize that I do kind of like it, and that school kind of squanders him. And that's just a bit sad. So I'd like to do my part in trying to rectify this. However, I am also aware that many of you are only here because school makes you study him. If that is the case, I'd like you to be able to take something away from these videos. Whether you're preparing for your exams or having to write your own analyses, I want these videos to be useful to you. And hey, maybe along the way you'll realize Shakespeare isn't as stuffy or as highbrow as schools made him out to be. And if that is the case, I have definitely done my job right. So I'm hoping you'll stick around for the rest of this series. I'm planning to release a new video every month, but that is it for this video. I hope you had a good time, and I'll see you next time. Fra-tha-tha. Shakespeare was an English, particularly the intense religious classes, English. And his influence continuous? Since when is there an E? Since there was no electricity at the time, plies? Many Elizabethans would have believed in fate. But what on earth has that got to do with fate? An actor who lived from 15... Year numbers. I love them. Was born in May of 15... which was named after Queen Elizabeth I, who reigned from 1556? Which was named after Queen Elizabeth I, who reigned from 1558 till 1503, because she apparently reigned backwards. Well, what it does is it adds another layer of formality to the play's introduction. Sorry about that. And that is either because you've been watching Doctor Who for a while, or because you've talked about sonnets in school before. Nearly choking. Everything is fine. Woo! Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and maybe share it with a friend or two. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to. It starts at as little as €2 a month, for which you'll get early access to any of my videos. And for €5 and up, you'll get exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest future episodes. Check out the link in the description if you're interested in any of that.